The crowd roared in anticipation, their voices echoing off the metallic walls of the grand arena. The air shimmered with the faint hum of force fields that kept spectators safe from the chaos about to unfold. Above the chaos, a holographic announcer projected into the sky, its booming voice reciting the accolades of the galaxy's greatest duel master, Xyvar Tahl. Xyvar stood in the center of the arena, his imposing form illuminated by the faint glow of his plasma blade. His skin, a deep, iridescent blue, rippled with every calculated movement. His forearms moved with precision, adjusting his armor and gripping his weaponry, the movements of a being who had mastered the art of combat over decades. He surveyed the crowd, basking in their adoration. This was his domain. Across the arena, a stark contrast appeared. A lone human, clad in plain, practical clothing, stepped into the light. John Carter looked utterly out of place. No grand entrance, no elaborate armor, just a man with a simple steel sword strapped to his side. He wasn't the tallest, the strongest, or the most intimidating figure the crowd had ever seen, and yet he moved with an unshakable calm, his eyes scanning the arena as though he'd been here before. The alien spectators erupted into laughter, pointing at the human with sneers and mocking gestures. Xyvar smirked, clearly amused by the absurdity of the situation. "This is your champion," he called out, his deep voice reverberating through the arena. "A relic with a scrap of metal." John remained silent, his expression unreadable. He unsheathed his sword, the steel catching the arena's artificial sunlight. The blade was unremarkable by comparison to the advanced weaponry surrounding him, yet its simplicity seemed almost defiant. He held it with ease, as though it were an extension of his arm, and took his place opposite Xyvar. The announcer's voice boomed again, silencing the crowd. The stakes of the duel were clear. This wasn't just about victory. It was about pride, respect, and the perception of an entire species. Humanity had been written off as weak and unworthy by the galaxy at large, and today was supposed to be the final confirmation of that belief. Xyvar addressed his opponent directly, his voice dripping with condescension. "I admire your courage, human. Few would dare to step into this arena with me. Unfortunately, courage alone won't save you." John finally spoke, his tone measured and steady. "Courage isn't what brought me here." The crowd fell silent, sensing the weight behind his words. Xyvar's smirk faltered for a moment before he raised his plasma blade in a salute. John responded with a nod, his movements deliberate and precise. The arena grew still, the anticipation almost palpable. Two warriors stood face to face, representing not just themselves but their entire species. As the signal to begin echoed through the air, the first clash was mere moments away. The signal rang out, sharp and resonant, cutting through the tension. Xyvar surged forward, his plasma blade igniting in a blaze of light. He moved with the fluidity of a predator, his forearms coordinating in a blur of lethal strikes. Each swing was precise, calculated, and designed to overwhelm. John shifted his stance, his sword raised in a deceptively simple guard. As Xyvar's blade descended, he sidestepped with a grace that belied his unassuming appearance. The plasma blade carved through the air, missing its mark by inches. John didn't counter, didn't press. He simply repositioned, his movements efficient and measured. Xyvar's strikes came faster now, a flurry of glowing arcs that lit up the arena. Each blow was met with the same calm evasion. The crowd began to murmur, their initial confidence wavering. Xyvar was attacking with the speed and ferocity of a champion, yet his opponent remained untouched. "What's wrong, human?" Xyvar growled, his frustration seeping through. "Too afraid to strike back?" John's reply was quiet, almost conversational. "I'm observing." Xyvar's fury flared. He lunged, aiming for a decisive blow, but John twisted, parrying the strike with a sharp clang. The impact sent vibrations up Xyvar's arms, and for the first time, he felt the weight behind the human's blade. This wasn't the reckless swing of an amateur. It was controlled, deliberate. The crowd leaned forward, the laughter fading into uneasy silence. They had come expecting a spectacle, a swift and humiliating defeat. Instead, they were witnessing something unexpected, a human who refused to play by their expectations. Xyvar adjusted his approach, stepping back to reassess. He switched to a more aggressive stance, utilizing his two lower arms to feint while the upper pair prepared a devastating overhead strike. The maneuver had ended countless duels before, and he was certain it would break the human's defenses. As Xyvar's blades descended, Jon stepped into the attack, his movements impossibly fast. His sword rose in a precise arc, deflecting one blade while simultaneously angling himself out of range of the others. In that split second, he locked eyes with Xyvar, a fleeting moment of connection that sent a chill through the alien's spine. The exchange ended as quickly as it began, with both combatants stepping back. Xyvar's breathing had quickened, a detail the crowd wouldn't have noticed but Jon did. He tilted his head slightly, as if cataloging the reaction. "You're skilled," Xyvar admitted, his voice tinged with grudging respect. "But skill alone won't save you from superior power." "Power," Jon said, his tone even, "is only as effective as the one wielding it." The words hung in the air, a challenge disguised as an observation. Xyvar snarled and lunged again, his strikes now driven by a mix of anger and desperation. But Jon moved with precision, exploiting the smallest openings, redirecting Xyvar's force against him. Each clash of blades revealed more. Xyvar was realizing too late that this human wasn't just surviving, he was studying, adapting. And for the first time in his storied career, Xyvar felt the faintest hint of doubt. Xyvar pressed forward, his strikes becoming wilder, more forceful, as if trying to compensate for the growing frustration gnawing at him. Every move felt increasingly labored, every calculated attack countered with almost insulting simplicity. The human wasn't fighting like a desperate underdog, he was fighting like someone who already understood the outcome. For the first time in his career, Xyvar felt the unsettling sensation of being toyed with. His muscles coiled with renewed effort as he unleashed a barrage of feints, sweeping arcs, and calculated strikes designed to disorient and overwhelm. But Jon remained an enigma, his movements impossibly calm, his footing flawless. Each feint was dismissed, each strike parried, until Xyvar's famed technique began to feel predictable. Jon's sword lashed out in a single deliberate motion, and before Xyvar could react, his plasma blade flickered. A faint pop echoed as one of the emitters on his weapon shorted, leaving him with 3 functioning blades instead of 4. He stared at the damage, stunned. No one had ever come close to disarming him in all his years of combat. "You're slipping," Jon said softly, his voice carrying just enough for Xyvar to hear. There was no mockery in his tone, no arrogance, just an unnerving matter-of-factness that pierced through Xyvar's mounting rage. Xyvar's fists tightened around his remaining blades. "A lucky strike," he spat, more to himself than his opponent. He surged forward again, channeling his frustration into sheer brute force. But brute force was what Jon had been waiting for. The human stepped into Xyvar's charge, weaving through the flurry of strikes with a precision that seemed almost inhuman. He didn't waste energy. Every motion was purposeful, every parry a masterclass in efficiency. Where Xyvar was brute strength, Jon was patience and finesse, and the contrast couldn't have been clearer. The crowd was no longer murmuring. They were silent, watching as their champion, an alien with centuries of training, struggled to land a single decisive blow against a human with a simple steel sword. Xyvar roared, pivoting to deliver a devastating horizontal slash with his 3 remaining blades. But Jon dropped low, spinning with a fluid motion that carried his sword in an upward arc. The strike wasn't meant to kill, it was meant to expose. Xyvar stumbled back, 2 more emitters now sparking uselessly. Only 1 blade remained active. The silence in the arena grew heavier. Xyvar's chest heaved as he stared at the human, who had barely broken a sweat. There was a realization dawning on him, one that he fought to suppress but couldn't ignore. This wasn't luck. This wasn't chance. This was mastery. "You're not just a swordsman," Xyvar said, his voice quieter now, tinged with something that felt dangerously close to respect. "I'm human," Jon replied simply. He raised his sword again, his stance as steady as it had been at the start. "And that's all I need to be." Xyvar tightened his grip on his lone remaining blade. He wasn't ready to concede, but deep down, he knew. He was fighting someone who had already won. Xyvar's remaining blade hummed in the air as he lunged again, his movements wild with desperation. His breath came in ragged bursts, his body drenched in sweat, and yet he pressed on, hoping the overwhelming force of his attacks would be enough to turn the tide. But Jon stood like a rock, every motion calculated, every step a careful decision. The alien's eyes narrowed as he swung his blade down with all his might, but John didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped aside, closing the distance between them in a single fluid motion. His sword came up in a swift, clean arc. This time, Xyvar didn't react fast enough. His last remaining blade flew from his hand, sent spinning into the air before clattering to the ground. Xyvar froze, his gaze flickering from the disarmed weapon to John, who stood mere inches away, his sword pointed at the alien's chest. For a long moment, the arena was dead silent. Xyvar's breath came in sharp, erratic gasps, his muscles trembling with the effort of the battle. He glanced around, at the alien spectators who had once cheered for him, now dead silent, and then back at the human. John's expression remained unchanged, calm, focused. "It's over," he said quietly. "You fought hard. You fought well. But this battle is mine." Xyvar's pride flared. He had never been defeated, never once in all his years of combat. To lose to a human was unimaginable. And yet, as he stood there, disarmed and humiliated, something deep within him recognized the truth. This human, this mere man, had outclassed him in every way that mattered. With a guttural growl, Xyvar lowered his head, acknowledging defeat. The power he had once held, the strength he had prided himself on, seemed to slip away in the face of John's calm mastery. The recognition of being bested by a human was more bitter than any wound he had ever received. John didn't press the advantage. Instead, he extended his hand, an offer of respect, something rare in the brutal world of duels. "You fought honorably," John said. "But honor doesn't always win the fight." Xyvar hesitated, the weight of his pride pulling at him. For a moment, he considered rejecting the gesture, but then he saw the sincerity in John's eyes. There was no mockery, no disdain. Only understanding. With a deep, reluctant sigh, Xyvar took the offered hand. The arena erupted in applause, the sound deafening. The once arrogant alien spectators were now in awe, their disbelief evident as they processed what had just transpired. Xyvar's defeat was a blow to their pride as well. A human had bested the champion, and there was nothing they could do to deny it. Xyvar stood in the center of the arena, defeated but not broken. He looked at John, his expression now a mixture of respect and something deeper, a recognition of something he had never considered. "You are different," he said quietly. "I misjudged you." John nodded, a slight smile crossing his lips. "We all get one chance to prove ourselves. Today I had mine." With that, John turned and began to walk away. The crowd continued to cheer, but John's focus remained ahead, on the long road back to Earth. He had done what no one thought possible. He had proven that humanity, despite all its flaws and limitations, had something that the galaxy's greatest warriors could never fully understand: an indomitable will to fight, to survive, and to rise above. And as he exited the arena, he knew that his victory wasn't just his own, it was the victory of every human who had ever been underestimated, overlooked, or written off as weak. It was a reminder that, sometimes, the most dangerous weapon in the universe was not a blade or a laser gun, but the strength of the human spirit.